So when I went to Ireland as a result of the money that I received from the Sterling Tompkins grant, I chose my research question to be, is peat moss biomass a sustainable alternative energy? I quickly learned that the answer to that was no, because peat moss does not generate quickly enough to be considered renewable. So my new research question was, could peat moss become a sustainable form of energy? And in order to understand this, it's important to understand how peat moss is formed. So peat moss is essentially partially decomposed organic matter, and it is the result of sphagnum decomposing in bogs. So there's two types of bogs in Ireland. There are blanket bogs and there are raised bogs. Blanket bogs are somewhat artificial because they were started by Neolithic man. So Neolithic farmers cleared the tops of hills in Ireland of trees because hills were less dense in trees and therefore it was less work. This caused leaching of soil nutrients and the subsequent acidification of the hilltops. Eroded materials were deposited as a hard pan, and this prevented any draining from occurring. So the farms were buried in peat, and by 500 BC the farmers had to begin cultivating the lowlands. The second type of bog is the raised bog. This is a naturally occurring bog type formed because glaciers left behind depressions in the ground. These depressions filled with glacial moraine and the soil became hammocky and chaotic. This caused poor drainage, so thousands of small lakes occurred in these depressions across Ireland. The reeds that grew on the sides and in these lakes died, but since the soil type didn't allow organic matter to drain, the organic matter kept building up higher and higher on the lake bed until it exceeded the water table. This caused stagnation and acidification, and by 500 AD the lakes had filled in and become bogs. Essentially, peat moss is the result of sphagnum decomposing over a long period of time. The current status of peat harvesting is that peat moss is considered a fossil fuel because it does not form quickly enough to be renewable. We saw two types of peat harvesting in Ireland. The first type of harvesting we saw was a local harvest. This is a picture that Dave took in Edenderry of a local harvest. And on this particular bog, called Black Castle Bog, it's a privately owned bog, and families own different plots of the bog. These families collectively hire a company to come in and harvest their bog and turn it into peat bricks. These peat bricks are stacked for drying and then used as a source of heat in the family's homes. This is a traditional practice in Ireland. The second type of harvesting that we encountered in Ireland was commercial harvesting. In commercial harvesting, the bogs are first cleared of any vegetation. Harrows then cut the top layer of peat off and allow it to dry. It's then vacuumed up by harvesters. These harvesters put it in piles and then it's transported to the plant on trains. From here, it can be packaged for garden fertilizer, as an absorbent in gas and hydrocarbon spills, or as filtration at composting sites and water treatment sites. But one of the biggest uses of peat is for electricity generation. There are 3 peat-burning power stations in Ireland, located in West Offaly, Low Ray, and Edenderry. Here, peat is burned to produce high-pressure steam. This steam turns magnetic turbines that produce electricity. This accounts for 40% of Ireland's residential electricity generation. As a result of peat harvesting, there are threats to biodiversity and ecosystem services. Bogs are often surrounded by birch woodland, which can host many types of wildlife. There are also threats to ecosystem services. The most serious is perhaps the bog's carbon-sinking properties. In a bog, for every 10 molecules of carbon respirated, 1 molecule remains in the bog permanently. When the bogs are drained, this releases a lot of CO2. Drained peatland accounts for 6% of worldwide CO2 emissions. Also, bogs are especially good at retaining nitrogen from acid rain. Unfortunately, traditional and industrial use has eliminated 47% of Ireland's original peatlands. Could peat harvesting ever be sustainable? It does not appear that the harvesting of peat can be sustainable on the scale required for use as an energy source. However, the developing field of sphagnum farming has some interesting implications. Sphagnum farming does not produce peat. This takes too long. However, the sphagnum fibers can entirely replace peat as fertilizer. Sphagnum farming can also help to restore destroyed bogland, so the farming of bogs can potentially be sustainable for horticulture, but probably not for energy. No form of harvesting peat at the scale required for energy presents a solution to the problem of bog destruction. The most promising solutions lie in the area of policy to protect national areas of conservation and special areas of conservation from bog destruction. I would just like to thank Sterling Tompkins for the generous opportunity to go to Ireland to study. Thanks for listening.